Okay, let's be real. You guys don't really want to see me review every single episode of this show. But at the same time, it's not like you guys don't want to hear what I have to say. No. You just want the greatest hits, as it were. You know, you guys want the controversial stuff. You want the clickbait. I got you. Don't worry about it. So let's talk about Little Miss Bliss.
Chumbawamba? Really, Natty? Chumbawamba!
Okay, maybe I need to be a little bit more specific than that.
Power of Four is a 5-part episode of the second season of the post-McCracken Powerpuff Girls series.
And like everything else about the show, it's gotten tons of hate, whether or not that's actually warranted or not. Which is why I'm here, almost a year later, to give more detailed analysis instead of jumping to conclusions. So, before we get to the elephant in the room... Okay, I guess that phrase doesn't entirely work here. The giraffe? The giraffe in the room? I'll talk about Bliss later, okay? Let's get to the actual episode and break it down first. Episodes? Special. It's a special.
Part 1 is a boring sitcom plot with the Powerpuff Girls in it.
Or as I like to call it, most of the show. It's part of the reason I don't really want to review it anymore. I'd go brain dead.
In this case, Bubbles blames stuff she does on an imaginary friend.
But this one has a twist. You see, the twist is the imaginary friend is real, but nobody can see her. Never heard that one before. That reminds me, I need to review Space Cases at some point.
Okay, look, I get it. This show is targeted towards children.
But that doesn't exactly mean that a samey and formulaic plot isn't worth criticizing.
Especially when it practically points out how formulaic and samey the setup really is.
Consider it this way. Imagine you had a child. Would you rather your child watch something that you find formulaic and boring and seems to have a dated structure despite the fact that it came out this decade? Or would you rather have them watch something where they use very similar concepts, but, you know, with a more interesting conceit to it?
I mean, don't get me wrong, the fact that the imaginary friend is her long-lost sister is an interesting conceit.
But, for one, I'll get to why that conceit really goes nowhere later on. And for two, how should I put this? They don't do anything with it. They don't do anything actually interesting in this part. And they could have! They really could have. But I feel like I've rambled long enough about one fucking part of this entire thing already, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move on and continue rambling about this part of the special.
So the girls have to do chores before they can go see the new Space Tow Truck movie.
And we get a joke? I think it's a joke. I think it's probably a joke.
The professor has a flashback to his favorite show as a child.
With the entire joke being that it's a radio show instead of a TV show. This is our main villain for later. Okay, look, you guys know what channel you're on. Here's a detailed list of the problems with this.
Okay, so first of all, he's a plow, but he still upholds traffic laws. The fuck? Second of all, I have issues with the fact that this is a radio show.
Although admittedly that has to do with how much of a student of mass media's history I am. Television was incredibly widespread by the 1960s, so realistically, for this to make sense as a radio show being its primary form of entertainment, it would probably be like the early 50s. That's something a lot of people miss about when they try to do 60s and associate that with everybody sitting around the radio. No, that was like 50s at the latest. And, you know, that really only works if this show still takes place in the 90s, which, it doesn't. Oh, speaking of the timeline, of mass media, that kind of ties into another problem I have with this.
We know the professor has old space tow truck tapes from the 70s.
The professor is already a space tow truck fan, so, I mean, presumably. So, realistically, the only reason to include this is to have it for reincorporation. Pretty much.
Considering the way that Earthplow introduces himself later, though,
it's not like we need him to be introduced now and then reincorporated. The introduction isn't necessary. He does a good enough job of, well, I say good enough job. There's another problem with this whole setup that really does tie into, tie when he introduces himself and the professor talking about him here. But you know what? I'll have to get there later, because I feel like that would be a good place to talk about that.
Earthplow! Yeesh!
the fuck was that delivery?
That Earthplow guy is always overacting.
And what was that line you said a second ago?
Yeesh!
Uh-huh.
Overacting?
Anyway, then we have this riveting scene.
She left.
Right. With her elephant?
Me?
You?
No, the elephant. Wait, who? Me.
What about you?
Oh, I think she means the elephant is me.
Wait, you're an elephant?
Blossom and Buttercup now think that Bubbles is crazy.
And, well, they're right, but that has nothing to do with this imaginary friend thing.
Hello, sisters.
Okay. So I get that this is supposed to be, like, misleading motivations for a character that, the girls are sort of fooled, and that's being communicated to the audience. I get that, but, considering there's another episode that pulls this off a lot better already.
In Road Trippin', the audience is presented with apathy from the professor that could be understandably perceived by a child as hatred.
So instead of having Bubbles just talk to someone they wind up not seeing, thinking she's crazy because of those misunderstandings, and maybe having music cues to communicate that's what's going on to the audience. Like we got in Road Trippin'. Instead, we get Bubbles actually doing something that adds to that interpretation that doesn't serve that only serves to add to that interpretation. Yeah, the thing about Bubbles' insanity having nothing to do with the imaginary friend thing, it's not a joke anymore. Call it 9/11.
Anyway, at the movie theater, we get a super funny joke where the professor's pen gadget malfunctions.
That serves really no purpose whatsoever other than reincorporation, so, thanks for making me fucking film more by elongating my script, you sociopaths.
Then Earthplow shows up and interrupts the movie.
Now, like I said before, the professor didn't need to introduce his character. He gives his own monologue to introduce himself. About that,
Attention, patrons of the arts! It is I, legendary thespian Earthplow!
Oh yeah, by the way, there's also fart jokes. Fart jokes are always funny.
I was the original galactic service vehicle!
no you weren't!
Even the flashback earlier shows no indication whatsoever that you did anything space-related.
And your audio damn sure didn't indicate that. And that's actually a big problem with this. Basically, because of what we were shown, honestly, I could have actually believed without the professor's introduction that Earthplow was a space surface vehicle. Maybe he got the name Earthplow because he's from Earth. That works. But not only does this become reincorporation for the sake of reincorporation with the professor's thing earlier, it also actually weakens what it's trying to reincorporate.
Anyway, during the inevitable fight scene, we get a part that I actually kind of found funny.
I'll take a small popcorn, please.
For a quarter more, you can get a medium.
That does equal savings.
This continues and they cut back to it once or twice. You know, I think it's actually kind of funny as sort of a satire on upsell culture in retail settings. Granted, when they cut back to it, I think it was a little bit better when it was subtle, but that's not a big issue for me. I do think that this is subtle enough and has enough social commentary to give something to adults while still being enough of lol random humor for kids to still enjoy it. So, you know, it works out pretty well. Even if, like I said, it does get a little bit old. At least from my perspective.
I mean, it damn sure beats the fight scene.
Your one-man show is about to get canceled.
I'll one-man show you!
It was fucking terrible.
Wait, how the fuck did Buttercup get launched straight forward? The cannons were between the dude's head, aiming at her. She would have basically gone nowhere. Matter of fact, wouldn't it have been funnier for her to just kind of drift back into the shot like a Looney Tunes character that just got blown up? Maybe that's me.
Oh no, Grills is trapped.
I love a captive audience!
Wait, didn't you just use that a couple minutes ago?
But now, my captive audience,
Jesus fucking Christ. This part is so goddamn lazy that they can't even write multiple jokes?
All knows. Bubble gonna run the over by the earth plow.
You know, it really sucks that the girls' superpowers magically stop working whenever they get restrained. If only there were some sort of random Deus Ex Machina that Bubbles had been talking about throughout this entire episode.
Okay, this is a bit overdramatic.
Nobody messes with my sisters!
Where did you record that? In the bathroom? What the fuck was that delivery?
Okay, great. So now we get into Bliss's backstory.
And this is the part of the review where I'm supposed to get super offended that they introduce a fourth Powerpuff Girl, and now it's a Mary Sue fan fiction, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to do that. You already know I'm not going to do that. As soon as I said this is the part of the review where I'm supposed to, you did. If you didn't know before then, let's be real. No. See, the original series did introduce kind of fourth Powerpuff Girls and honorary Powerpuff Girls, as it were, in a few different episodes before this. So, you know, it's not like this is out of the ballpark for this. I'm not going to talk about how it's bad because it's a fourth Powerpuff Girl. I'm not going to talk about it being a Mary Sue. You guys know, if I do talk about it being a Mary Sue, it's going to be because the writing is shit. So instead of calling it a Mary Sue, I'm just going to point out how bad the writing is.
So basically, Bliss was created the same way the Powerpuff Girls were, but before them.
Thus, why she's a teenager, I guess.
But her powers were so unstable that she exploded whenever she felt emotion, so she self-isolated herself on an island where she met a tiny elephant named Me.
And I'll cross this bridge later, but I feel like Me's name isn't just there for a terrible Who's On First joke, so I'm not really going to rag on it. I'll tell y'all why later.
Mojo Jojo was also there.
And the way that they include him in the story is pretty much outright proof of what I was saying, I don't know, like a year ago? About how this isn't actually a reboot. The clip, please.
oh ho 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 ho! You girls forget that Mojo used to be the professor's lab assistant.
Okay, see, this would have been a point for them to possibly retcon Mojo's backstory in some sense if this actually were a reboot. But they didn't. They kept it the same. Mojo was the professor's lab assistant. You're probably thinking, oh, they could have retconned it. Oh, maybe he was super intelligent back then.
Well, guess what? He was just a stupid fucking chimp like he'd already been.
So yeah, between this, pointing out why things are different from the original, actively referencing some things from the original that aren't there now. Yeah, this is a continuation.
And now Mojo finds his best friend here with his most accursed enemies.
They were created the same way, by the same person. You know, considering the fact that chimps have like half the lifespan that humans do, I'm starting to think that maybe Mojo's just old and senile in this version, and that's why he's so dumb.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with the backstory on its own per se.
But what I do have a problem with is how little context it provides to the rest of the special. I mean, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but the fact that she can't control her powers is really just there to add 10 minutes.
The similar origin with the girls also should have
Not just could have. Should have.
had her later struggles with controlling her powers be relevant to the girls.
After all, their powers are still evolving as well, so, you know, this could have been a good excuse to show what the girls are capable of in the future. Both the positives and the negatives of that. But instead it's really just an excuse to push the girls aside for about 40 minutes. Not that this show needed any help doing that.
The conflict with Mojo is also completely irrelevant.
But I'll talk about that more when I get to a point where it makes sense to talk about it. I wouldn't normally say something about a show not really living up to a potential, you know, because, you know, that's kind of just looking at the show for what it could be rather than what it is, and that's not fair. But in this case, it's a little bit different, because it's straight up them not using what they've got, what they set up themselves at all.
You know, kind of like her accent from when she first showed up.
Yeah. Yeah, good job on the continuity, guys.
So part 3 is basically Once Upon a Townsville, but without musical numbers.
Or pseudo-feminist propaganda, but that's beside the point. How'd that episode win an award again? Oh, right. Pseudo-feminist. Yeah. That explains it.
This one also attempts to operate on the self-discovery elements of Power-Up Puff.
And basically the solution is, don't overthink it. But wasn't the entire point that you lost control of your powers during extreme emotion?
In fact, the first scene we see you not worrying about it is a scene where you lose control of your powers.
There's no conflict of her powers going out of control after this. Her powers, there's her getting angry, but that's not her powers going out of control. She's actively using them. That pretty much means that the problem just solved itself. For no reason. See, I'm not sure if you knew this, but that's a sign of bad writing.
You know, I've been alone so long, it's nice to have people who care about me so much. Besides me, of course.
See, even though I think most of this is a garbage fire, I do need to give them props where it's due, namely with this symbolism going on with me, the elephant, intentional or not. It's going to be more relevant later, but something I want to point out, there's a reason I wanted to point to this line in particular. It kind of shows her sense of isolation as well. I think it's a good thing that this symbolism is here, even if it wasn't necessarily intentional, although I would believe them if they said it was. But I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't. You know what I mean?
The next part is all about how Bliss isn't ready, according to the professor.
Which actually contradicts what was going on in the previous episode. You let her go out and do hero stuff with the girls before. Why is that not the case now?
Your powers are still untested.
Isn't that the point of the simulation? I mean, the implication, I think, is supposed to be that she's only done a few of these training exercises, which would be fair. If not for the fact that you already had the girls out with Bliss there, with the girls helping Bliss learn how to control her powers. So, either this is selective absentee parenting, which is bad writing, or this is contradictory parenting, which is also bad writing. See, this technically would be the beginning of the episode in the normal episodic format, so it's like, oh, that's fine. It doesn't have to be 100% consistent. I get that. But considering the fact that these episodes are intended to be watched as one unit, I don't think anybody gets away with using the episodic format as an excuse on this one.
So anyway, turns out Me can talk and doesn't like the professor or the girls.
And this is a bit more relevant later, but throughout this entire thing, I feel like his reasoning for trying to turn Bliss against the girls is, like, particularly weak.
He wants you to listen to him, but he won't listen to you. And the Powerpuff Girls didn't stand up for you very much either.
I mean, they did outright tell the professor they thought he was wrong. And he kind of shut them down before they could explain their reasoning. Yeah, putting it on the girls just seems like a way to make it clear that he's trying to deceive Bliss, which isn't really necessary from my perspective.
I'd accept this more if the girls literally telling Bliss to come with them anyway served as a catalyst for her trusting the girls.
But I mean, it really doesn't.
Okay, I'd have to give credit to the fight scene with Chipmunk Commando.
It actually does a good job of showing Bliss going out of control. Not losing control of her powers, but more so losing control of her emotions while still having control of her powers. Which, you know, kind of shows that she can control her powers. See what I mean about earlier things being kind of pointless? Yeah, and considering the fact that she got an upper hand...
A dude that can apparently dodge anything he can see instantly.
It could be interpreted as showing that she's more powerful, but the way she does it indicates that it's not so much her being more powerful, it's just the powers that she has. This portion does a good job of that. Later, it's not going to be that way, but that's beside the point.
As it turns out, Me was actually him the entire time.
And although I kind of question the logistics of him, like, being there with Bliss on the island, and presumably for years, that seems to be the implication. But, you know, I'd chalk that up to a fairly normal level of plot convenience rather than, you know, anything too egregious like some of the other stuff here. But, yeah, it actually works pretty well, I think.
The fact that Bliss winds up merging with him temporarily,
and the fact that both me and him are pronouns, both of those names are pronouns, it actually adds a lot to it. You know, me and him are one and the same. It's a nice touch. Again, it might have partially not been intentional. I really hope they didn't just pick the name Me so that they can have that stupid little who's on first joke. I would like to think that they actually had a reason behind it, considering how well it fits. So I'm going to go with that interpretation.
Let me push back a bit to Me/him enacting his plan.
They're threatened by you. They say you don't want them around. That you want to be the only Powerpuff Girl.
See, there's actually a reason presented to the audience for, you know, Bliss to potentially believe that this might be true about the professor. That actually makes sense from a narrative perspective. Not only is there nothing presented to indicate that the girls could feel this way, everything presented indicates the opposite.
Never mind the fact that him is just reciting the plot from Princess Buttercup.
Wait a minute. Yeah, I just realized something. What if this had been about Princess Morbucks instead? I mean, maybe Princess Morbucks gets real powers. She turns good. She decides to help. The girls don't believe that she has good intentions. They have good reasons for feeling that way, but that doesn't mean Princess Morbucks isn't hurt by the distrust, which him takes advantage of. We could have had something like that be really well written, really well executed. But you know what? We also could have had this be really well written and well executed. But no! Fucking thanks.
So the next thing that happens that actually matters is the girls separate him from Bliss.
Blah, blah, blah. Fake out ways of saving the day that really serve to do nothing but kill the pacing by adding slapstick comedy into this intense action scene for no reason whatsoever. You can tell I'm tired. Okay?
Okay, so the girls actually having to properly work together with a construct like the Mutilator was actually a good idea.
Because it operates on the themes of family that this special has been trying to present throughout, and it actually gives the girls somewhat of a spotlight for once.
Instead, that fails miserably, and Bubbles just slaps a bomb into the possessed fusion instead.
And, you know, I said I wasn't gonna just call this fanfiction-y and call it a day, but really don't know how else to describe this last part.
Let's fighting love. Let's fighting love.
Is Batman! Blah blah blah, giant anime fight scene. It's the power of sister because I'm the big sister, my powers fucking win!
Basically, Bliss is OP. Bliss is more OP because of these sisters that she has, or what the fuck ever. For fuck's sake. By the end, there's like multiple points where they say that Bliss is the only one who's powerful enough to do shit.
You gotta stop him! You're the only one powerful enough to do it!
He's right, girls. Now that I'm back to full power, I'm the only one that can push Saturn back into place.
Goku, like I said, it's not the fact that they introduce a fourth Powerpuff Girl that makes this bad. It's not the fact that they introduce a fourth Powerpuff Girl that makes this a Mary Sue. It's bad writing that makes this a Mary Sue. I would even be willing to accept this character being more powerful, but honestly, Bliss's character arc is like all over the fucking place, man. And this episode, it feels like they just crammed together a bunch of other episodes with like a weak-ass through line that they don't even stay consistent with. And it somehow has more filler than typical. How does that work?
This series can successfully do self-discovery and learning how to use one's own capabilities. And the series can do misinterpretations of character motivations decently.
The fact that so frequently, the show refuses to do that is a detriment to the series as a whole. I can really only think of one more thing that I can say about this special.
Eesh.